Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. Today I'm very happy that we've got Randy Ginsburg all the way from New York, and his book, he has a book. I don't usually start by going, and their book is called, but in this case I feel like I must, because his book title is Adversity to Advantage. So I'm like, we have got to speak, right?
Yes.
Anything to talk about rights of titles, but no, none of that. I'm curious about your story. But first of all, tell us a little bit about the book and who you are, like what excites you every day.
Yeah, definitely. So the book is titled Adversity to Advantage, How to Overcome Bullying to Find Entrepreneurial Success. And I've always loved entrepreneurship. It's what I studied in school. And growing up from a young age, I was always obsessed with just creating my own opportunities and trying to make a little money, whether it was door-to-door snow shoveling or buying and selling Snapples out of my locker at school. And I went on to start my first business when I was younger in high school, buying and selling sneakers, which actually was motivated by my experiences with childhood bullying. And so the book was sort of an extension of that, where I went and studied and researched a group of highly successful and diverse entrepreneurs, all of whom were bullied in adolescence, in an effort to uncover whether or not these experiences actually positively motivated them to pursue entrepreneurship, and then overall just help them grow in a variety of different ways.
So fascinating. So do you think entrepreneurs are born or made then?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that's actually how the motivation for the book came, because that's the golden question, right? Everyone debates that. I personally think that it's a mix of both, that you could be born with creativity, you could be born with business acumen, but all the things that happen along the way are the external environmental events that shape you. That's really what drives you to go and pursue that creative path and that path of entrepreneurship. So I think in that regard, it's more the nurture aspect of taking what's around you and how it shapes you and defines you.
Yeah, and I think there's some kind of grit that you learn through adversity, right? That
Yeah,
just
definitely.
you
And
get to
resilience.
practice. Yeah, you get to practice more than maybe other people in driving
Yeah.
yourself forward. But I
Yeah.
recently attended a talk, and I'm not going
Hmm.
to science you on this, but I recently attended a talk about how there is a resilience gene and how
Oh,
some
really?
people, yeah. And I was like fascinated because I'm very much in that nurture camp. And then I was like, oh, well, some of us do have a baseline gene of more resilience, apparently. That
Interesting.
I guess the magic triangle then is resilience gene, getting the shit kicked out of us,
Exactly.
and then going into entrepreneurship.
The perfect storm.
The perfect storm. Yay us, right? So give us a little bit of context, Randy. You said you were bullied when you were younger. I mean,
Yeah.
before that, did you already? I don't know. Was your dad in business, or did you have role models around you that maybe modeled what entrepreneurship was like?
Both my parents worked, and my dad did work in business. My mom was a research librarian, but neither of them had any entrepreneurial aspects, really. My dad had a couple of side hobbies of photography and would sell a bit of his photos, but that wasn't his main job. So the entrepreneurship thing, I think I don't really know exactly where it came from, but it started at a very young age, like I mentioned, and it was always something that I was super excited about. I was always very creative. I was always just trying to make something happen and do anything that I could to, to hustle. Exactly. So, but like I said, I was bullied starting from really fifth grade to up until the middle of high school, so 5 or 6 years. And growing up, I was very small, skinny, greasy hair, buck teeth, lips, like any appearance trait that you could think of to potentially get made fun of for, I had it. So I took a brunt of a lot of bullying like
Yeah,
that. What do you say?
an easy target in a way.
Yes, definitely an easy target. And I didn't really stand up for myself, so it kind of kept coming. And it was clear that it was affecting me physically and emotionally. I had a lot of anxiety. I was very anxious, very depressed, would avoid going to school, got frequent stomach aches and headaches, started to isolate myself. Because traditionally, you think of bullying as the kid who sits alone at the lunch table and has no friends. And for me, that wasn't it at all. I actually had a lot of friends, and I was involved in a ton of sports teams and extracurricular activities. I was always busy, but there were my friends, quote unquote friends, were also the ones who were relaying the bullying. And some of them that I was closer with, they were there for it, and they might not necessarily have been the ones who were actually saying or doing verbal or physical things, but they were bystanders, and they were afraid that if they spoke up, maybe the bullying would then be targeted to them. So at that young age, you don't really want to put yourself in the way of fire. If you're not the one getting the heat, you kind of just stay away from it and mind your own business. So it was a tough situation. But one of the things that I was also bullied in was I grew up in a fairly wealthy area, and a lot of kids had means to get all the new sneakers and clothes. And my parents were definitely able to provide for me, but they had a mindset of you earn for what you work for. And so if I wanted something, I needed to go work for it, which is also, I think, where a little bit of the entrepreneurial aspect came, as if you want these new sneakers, if you want these new clothes, well, figure out how to get them. And
the hunger in a way.
Exactly.
It's not being handed to you. So you're like, and then you've got that added, like, well, I'm being bullied for how I look and, maybe what I'm wearing or the thing, and so if I want to create change, you almost are driven or to take ownership of that somehow.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'd always loved sneakers, and I'd always loved fashion. And I had been, at the time, now it's super popular, but at the time, probably 2010, buying and selling sneakers, this whole sneakerhead craze was really popping up, especially in the States. And so kids were buying and selling these collectible Nikes, Adidas, Asics, whatever it may be, on Facebook and Instagram and all of these social media platforms that had just been popping up. And then there were these in-person trade conventions as well. And it was this whole community of people who loved sneakers and clothing. So I had been observing this for a little bit, and I was like, all right, I have the idea. I'm going to join this and start buying and selling sneakers, and I'll be able to make some money on the side, and I'll also be able to have all of the clothes, anything that I wanted to get, I'll be able to get it. So it started, I convinced my parents, I was like begging them for $150 to buy the first pair. They reluctantly agreed. And then I bought the first pair for $150, thought it would sell immediately. 2 months later, I still had it. And they were just like, where the damn thing was like, we shouldn't have given you this money. And then lo and behold, 2 months later, it finally sold for $220. And then with that, the $70 profit and the 220, I bought 2 more pair and then traded one for another 2. And just it gradually snowballed until I had around $1,000. And from there, I was able to start buying pairs in bulk. So like anything that you buy in bulk, the more you buy, the cheaper you get. And so I started to do this and then flip those, and it just continued to snowball and snowball until I was making like a couple of $1,000s a month, and got all the sneakers I had wanted. I was able to afford the clothes I wanted, and just running that business, I went from being the kid who I felt was defined by my bullying to now the sneakers and fashion kid. I had more.
Was any of this happening in parallel?
It was all happening in parallel.
So that's a really fascinating thing to notice, because as you said, people have an idea of the kid who's being bullied, right? Who's like the loner out in with no friends or whatever. And it just highlights that sometimes those of us who have struggles going on, the outside might be like, yeah, I'm good, I'm hustling, I'm pushing, and we could use that as a mask sometimes to cover all sorts of other things, right?
Yeah, definitely. It was a mask, but at the same time, it was also an escape. It was kind of a two-way street, because for me, I felt like I was invested in something that had deeper meaning. It gave me purpose. I enjoyed it. When I was focusing on that, my mind wasn't on all of the hardship that I was going through. And that also really, it taught me a lot, and it kind of birthed my love for business entrepreneurship. And then from there, I started to get more involved in fashion and took some courses at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and then started making my own clothes and would buy and sell them at school. And it was just really snowballed into something that went from an interest and this little risk that I took in a side hustle to something that consumed my entire life and identity at that point. And by being able to start that business and reinvent myself, that's what gave me the confidence to then stand up for myself and overcome the bullying. So they were really intertwined.
Wow. So I was thinking of confidence the whole time. Like if ever there was an escape that was maybe beneficial in a way, Because my escape was alcohol addiction. I didn't really make a lot of money out of that, and it wasn't very useful. But when I quit drinking, I then channeled all of that sort of built up emotion and rage and like stuff into building my own business as well, whether it was side hustle or sort of full time. So I get that kind of channeling it. And then the knock-on effect that you hadn't really planned for was now that you've got this confidence and you start standing up to the bullies. But before we go there, because I'm curious about what that looks like, what was the lowest point for you? Because you're building something, but equally, I know what emotional distress looks like, especially when you're hiding a lot of it, where you feel friends are betraying you in a way by not kind of supporting you. I mean, how low did it get for you?
Yeah, I mean, the lowest point was really I would avoid leaving the house for anything. I was afraid to socialize with people, severe anxiety, my grades were falling, my every part of my life was affected. And the worst part was I was an only child, and I lived, of course, with both my parents, but I never told them a thing. So they had no idea. So everything, with the exception of one or two people who I had confided in, but they didn't know the full depth of it. It was all built up inside. So that was really the hardest part for me.
Yeah. The fear and the shame and the
exactly. I was embarrassed to tell any adult, any parent, so I kept it all inside. And when you harbor that all up, it makes matters even worse. So that was lowest.
Didn't notice, or
what'd you say?
Teachers didn't notice what was going on?
Not really. I went to a couple of the guidance counselors at my school, and they brought a couple kids in, and it was more of just like a slap on the wrist. You know, like there was no actual action taken, no prevention, no intervention. They didn't do a great job of handling it.
No, and when we talk about bullying, that can mean so many things as well, right? So I'm curious, definitely. It's not to go, look after yourself. You don't need to go fully into the story, but I'm curious if it was kind of physical abuse or mental, emotional, like what kind of angle was it taking for you?
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot of verbal, mental, but at the same time, there were a couple physical instances. I did have rocks thrown at me once. That was probably the most, pretty sizable stones. That was probably the most physical aspect of it. But an interesting stat that I talk about in the book is the CDC, as of 2016, recently came out with their formal definition for bullying, because it actually never had a actual definition. It was just what people would think, maybe someone being mean to each other. You never really knew how to categorize it. And what they came out was that their bullying requires two criteria in order to be considered bullying in the eyes of the CDC: a power imbalance, so a struggle of like authority, where it might be a teacher or a parent or someone older, and then repetition. So it needs to continue, is how they define bullying. But the problem with that is that in instances like myself and so many other people, there was no real power imbalance, because it came, it was still friends. It was people who I felt like I was on an equal playing field with. There was no age difference. There was no positional power difference. So in theory, my case would never be classified by the CDC as actual bullying, which is why there's all these statistics are skewed, because there's so many other kids who are going through this. When you speak to a kid or even adult and you say, what's bullying? They'll say it's when someone's mean to each other. Like everyone has their own definition, but it's very streamlined, basic, surface level. So all of these people who would say that, who might have experienced it, but don't necessarily categorize it with a power imbalance or acts of repetition, they don't get reported in the statistics. So I thought that was very interesting as well.
And then was there online bullying as well? I know you said it was kind of early stages.
Yeah, a lot of online bullying, which now I think is some of the toughest stuff for kids. Like I grew up with Instagram came out when I was at my tail end of high school. Okay. Now, if Instagram was in middle school or Snapchat was in middle school, I can't even imagine the effects that it would have had on me, other kids, because I got bullied, but I'm sure there were kids in my school who got it worse. I'm not like saying I got it the worst ever, and I'm sure there's people who got it 10,000 times worse than I did. And I just can't imagine how having that social media so ubiquitous and everywhere, and just growing up with it really affects you mentally.
Yeah, and it's a relentless chipping away at
Mm-hmm.
confidence, self-worth, all of these things, especially if you're holding it in and you're not actually kind of fact checking in a way what
Yeah,
people are saying. And that is an age when you're just vulnerable and open to, oh, that's, I want to fit in, I want to belong, and that's what people think of me.
exactly. And with social media, the validation of likes, and when you're at that age and you haven't fully developed that idea of validation and who you should seek it from, and you want to feel acceptance into your peer groups, and the fact that likes are used as that token, and yet they're so not that, they're so skewed. It's really powerful.
It really is powerful, and it's affecting so many people's mental health at the moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you get to this point, there's these parallel roads, your confidence is growing because you're like, I'm making some dollar now, right?
Yeah.
And how do you start kind of maybe standing up to your bullies or not letting it affect you anymore? What shifted?
Yeah. So the first time that I ever stood up for myself actually came right before I started the business. So that was like where that was right in eighth grade, like end of eighth grade. I had been actually receiving some harassment over instant messenger, so over cyberbullying. And it was of this, like, he was a leader in the pack, but was also someone who I'd spent a lot of time with. And I lashed out at him. I was like, I'm done doing this. I'm done following you around. Like, really just like for the first time ever set my ground. And to my surprise, his response, instead of being like, go away or screw you, was, I'm proud of you. You should have done this a long time ago.
Whoa.
And I was like caught for a loop. Like I had no idea how to react. And then the premise of our conversation after was like, should have done this a long time ago. I'm going to make sure that no one else messes with you. And then from those next few days, he actually stood by his word. And if there, because he had a strong voice within other kids. And if someone messed with me, he would intervene. And it slowly, that was the first step of it. And then me still getting my own confidence back came from the business. And so when I would then get bullied for appearance, or I would get bullied for wearing, because I was super into fashion, so I would wear some things that were pretty unconventional, and people would of course make comments. And it just went from me used to be caring so much that I would go and change for them, to just saying, having the confidence because I was doing something for myself. I was invested in something with a purpose. I was making money, and it didn't faze me anymore. And I just said, all right, I'm going to do me. And the more and more that I did that, and I showed that it didn't affect me, they started losing interest. Because if you show that it doesn't affect you, they don't get the same enjoyment out of it. The whole enjoyment for them, for whatever reason, is seeing you be upset. So if you're able to, whether you do feel it or not, if you're able to portray that confidence outward, that was pretty strong for me as well. That really helped me.
And so I'm also struck by the contrast between the kid in his room running his business, who's not telling anyone and is sort of suffering in silence, to one who has a book out, who's ended up researching kind of the links between bullying and entrepreneurship. And you've been on a quest in a way to understand, is that catalyst? Like, can we actually be grateful in a way for those experiences to move us forward? Talk me through that middle bit, because I'm always curious about, like, how the hell does somebody take those steps to then go completely open and be on a public platform, podcast, and all the rest of it?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, I hadn't told my parents at all. The first time that I actually told them was the end of my senior year of high school. I was in this program called Life School, which is an acronym for learning independently from experience. So for my senior year, it was a school within my school, but there was like 20 kids per grade. Everyone was super tight knit. There were no tests. It was all projects and public speaking, which I'd been terrified of public speaking because I hated attention. I hated everything that came with it. And then that year, I actually went to learn that I liked public speaking, and with the confidence and everything that came along with it, found that I actually preferred that better than test taking and all these different things I learned about myself in this last year. So part of that program was that at the end of the year, you would write a 20-minute speech about your life and how the program had affected you. And then you would present it to teachers, family, friends, whoever you wanted to invite. So I wrote this 20-minute speech that was kind of this tell-all about everything that I'd gone through my entire school years, and presented it to my friends, my family, and my teachers, all of whom, aside from the teachers, was the first time that they were hearing it. So definitely probably wasn't the best way to just break this to my parents in front of like 30 other people, but I did. And that was the first time that anyone really heard about it. And that speech actually served as the beginning basis of the personal section of my book. So it kind of came full circle in a bit. And
What, how scared were you? How scared were you? So not only are you public speaking, which you're just getting, you realize you like it, but you still, you know, your early days, now you're more of a public speaker, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you know your parents are in the audience, and you know you're telling this deep kind of personal thing. Like,
yeah. I mean, I was definitely terrified because I wouldn't have had, no other time in my life would I have had the confidence to go and do that. That was definitely the most confident point I had been in my life up until that point. But still, I was terrified. I had no idea how to react. My parents were visibly distraught and confused, and you know, yeah. So it was really an emotional and confusing time, from not even just in that moment, but then the following months after, because they felt so upset that they missed these signs. You know, if you're a parent, especially of an only child, and your son tells you that I was depressed and anxious and going through all this, and you had no clue the entire time, that was
really, all sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really tough.
And just the reason I ask that is because I want our listeners to understand that sometimes you just have to do it afraid. You know, sometimes we wait.
That's by stepping out of your comfort zone. You know, imagine if I had never done that, then I had never told anyone, still kept it in. One, from an emotional aspect, the confidence and just everything else still would not have been there. Two, the book probably would have never even been a thought in my mind. But so that was the end of high school. And then I went on to university. I studied at Syracuse University, where I studied entrepreneurship and marketing. And I recently graduated last May, but throughout those 4 years, it was still, you know, a work in progress. And it still is. Some of the things that I learned with bullying is that you interview and you study some of the most famous entrepreneurs in the world. And still to this day, for example, Tom Ford, he says that if a group of 8-year-olds kicked a soccer ball his way, that he would still bubble up with anxiety and fear and be terrified. And he's one of the most famous, well-known people in the world. And still, if a group of 8-year-olds approached him, all of the emotion and fear and memory that comes from his experiences with bullying still stay with him. So for me, I feel the same way. You know, I'm definitely more confident. A lot of the anxiety has subsided, but there's always those lingering effects that do come back. And even when I'm public speaking or just interacting with people on a daily basis, there are
fear of judgment, fear of rejection.
Of course. But none of that ever goes away completely.
Right, but you just keep moving forward.
You got it.
And then you've also, we entrepreneurs have a bit of a chip on our shoulder sometimes, right? So there's so I didn't go to school as a kid because I was raised in a religious cult. And then I ended up with a chip on my shoulder, you know, trying to prove people wrong that I mattered in the world and that I could achieve and all these sorts of things. And it drove me to night school, get my master's degree, do all these things, and then keep going, right?
Exactly. No, that's exactly what I have as far as what I feel I have as far as work ethic and the entrepreneurial aspect and the drive. And that was actually something that I initially was curious about when I went to go start my research. And so one of the founding blocks of my research, one of the first studies that I found that propelled me to go on and continue with the book, came from a woman, a doctor named Ellen DeLara. And she happened to actually be a professor at Syracuse University, where I studied. And she, in addition to being a professor, she's a researcher, psychologist, and an author of this book called Bullying Scars. And it examines the whole life cycle of bullying and the post-traumatic effects after in adulthood. And one of her chapters was about the positives. And so she did a study on her own of 900 adults aged 18 to 65 from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all occupations. So there were some entrepreneurs, but there were also doctors, lawyers, service workers, the whole spectrum. And what she found was that 47% of these people, so almost 50% of the respondents, reported that the bullying actually had a positive effect on their lives. which was crazy to me because conventionally you think of bullying to be this terrible thing that ruins lives and no one can ever come back from. But now 50% of these people are saying that it actually helped them grow in both their personal and professional lives. So within that 50%, they then broke down some of the criteria and how it helped them. So the most amount of people, I think it was like 14% of the 47, reported more resilience and independence and confidence, which is of course crucial in entrepreneurship. You get 100,000 no's before you get a yes.
Yep.
And there's so much ambiguity and uncertainty and financial instability that you need to keep going. Then they also reported that it helped their moral development. So not wanting to treat people how they had been treated, and their emotional intelligence in terms of sympathy and empathy and just being able to connect with people on a more humanistic level because of what they had previously gone through. And then the last one that a bunch of people reported was goal attainment. So having this chip on your shoulder, this desire to prove yourself and this grit. And so all of these things, which were such massive parts of that they derived from their bullying, were actually so essential for entrepreneurship. And so once I had this study, I kind of knew what to look for a bit in these entrepreneurs who I researched and interviewed. And what I found was by doing all this research and speaking to all of these different people, every single one of those checked out in all of their stories.
Really? Okay.
And some more stuff, but the resilience, the emotional intelligence, which was a huge aspect because entrepreneurship is such a social profession. So you're required to build teams, you're required to interact with people on a daily basis, hire people, fire people.
Yeah, relationships.
Yeah, and by going through not just bullying, but any type of adversity, whatever it may be, you develop this crucial aspect of emotional intelligence that has actually served entrepreneurs specifically. It's like a superpower. So I found that to be really interesting as well.
So I'm going to read a quote from your book that I just took from your website because I love it, and then I'll ask a question. So what you say is the best way to overcome the lingering effects of bullying is to harness the raw emotion. So harness that, rage or something, and use it as fuel to motivate you. So literally as the energy that can push you forward. So this is what I'm curious about. Is there any downside to this kind of using it as fuel? And I'm coming from the perspective of, burnout, of working with people in startups who maybe aren't looking after their social, emotional, mental health because they're so like obsessed with fueling, whatever the chip on their shoulder is. And so I'm curious what you think. Is there a downside? Can there be a downside? How do we evolve within this?
Yeah, so I think that's two parts to that, because one, you don't want, when you're doing any profession, but specifically entrepreneurship, you want to have that chip on your shoulder and you want to use that fuel, but at the same time, up to a certain point, you don't want to be doing it for them. You don't want to be doing something just to prove other people wrong. You want to be doing it because you enjoy it and because it means a lot to you. And the second part of that is, yes, mental health, especially in entrepreneurship, is such a important topic. And I talk about it in the book, just the dark side of entrepreneurship, because some people confuse their self-worth with the success of the company.
Absolutely.
So you need to learn the balance of course, you might be putting in 80-hour weeks, but at the same time, if the business ultimately ends up failing, you are not a failure. And that's what some people have trouble separating themselves from their business, which I think is a really important part, because you have all of this grit and motivation and fuel and that you've harnessed and built up, but you need to be able to deploy it in the right way without physically and mentally hurting yourself. Because in order for your business to succeed to its highest point, you need to be your healthiest. Yes. So that's what I think people have a bit of trouble with as well. But there's a study in the book, and I don't remember the exact statistics, but entrepreneurs in general are significantly more likely to have depression, anxiety, ADHD, and ultimately commit suicide. So going into that, you already have these notions and these predetermined things where statistics have shown that we're already more likely to feel these ways. And then you're adding on all of the stress and ambiguity and everything else that comes with entrepreneurship. So taking care of your mental health and physical health is really important, especially for that career path. And I talk a bit about more in the book just how important working out is, and some entrepreneurs use mindfulness and meditation, and then there's therapy and all the different ways that you can keep yourself sharp and ultimately your business sharp as well.
Yeah, because there's that full circle, right? It keeps your business sharp if you are kept sharp and learn to handle some of the knocks. Now, you studied entrepreneurship. That's not a very mainstream. I mean, I guess it's getting more popular, but I was like, oh, must look into this if there's one of those out there. Did they touch on any of that well-being stuff within that entrepreneurship?
They don't. No, they really don't touch on the well-being aspect, but they do touch on thinking. So using your right brain thinking and your creative thinking versus left brain in the different ways. Like I took a course on creativity and imagination. And so it was just training your mind to start to think, because we are wired to normally think so analytically. And now in the world of data, everything is data driven, but it's still important to employ that right brain creative thinking. So some of the courses did touch on that, but they never really focused on the emotional aspect.
I guess that's a little bit about balance, isn't it? You mentioned suicide, and a lot of that is, what you were doing in your early days, which is holding on to everything. And when you hold on to everything, it often feels bigger than it is because you think you're the only one in the world dealing with that thing, right? And so
definitely.
I think there need to be more conversations about not only the challenges in the entrepreneurship space, but just talking, especially for men. Like the suicide rate's higher for men. I think entrepreneurship is fueled by mostly men as well. We're redressing the balance, but right, there's something just about talking. I mean, like, I'm curious about what you do in your life personally to kind of look after yourself.
Definitely. Well, I have found that, like you said, speaking with people is great. So therapy is a really powerful way to just get feelings off your chest. But for entrepreneurs specifically, and some people who are more successful startup founders that I've spoken with, it's such a specific career path that only the people who are involved in it really can fully understand the sacrifices that are needed and what's going on. So a lot of these networks are popping up of just entrepreneurs connecting with themselves. And initially you go to a networking event and you give your small talk and what do you do? But now these networks are popping up where it's more of a support system and you're sharing the issues and the troubles that you're going on in your business, but also on in your own personal mental lives. And by having someone who's actually going through the same type of struggle and stress from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's almost better than a therapist or better than just venting to your best friend, because they actually know what's going on and they can relate to it and they can empathize with it. So I think for me, finding the people who, whether they're running their own business or they're musical artists or creative directors, but they have that sort of self-starter creative attitude and they're making things happen for themselves, and then going and speaking to them, I find that really powerful for me as well, on top of just like working out and trying to eat healthy and things like that.
Yeah, all of that helps create balance. But I know if you ask for advice or you want to have a rant to a civilian, as it were, right, they'll be like, well, just stop working. Just
exactly. Or like, take a break.
Take a break. Just stop. And you're like, you don't understand. This is my life,
Well, when you're working a 9 to 5, or just even for someone else, there's a different, you might love your job and you might be really devoted to it, but entrepreneurship is such an obsession. And it's controlling that obsession to not letting it reach an unhealthy peak, but still bordering where, you can make things happen. So it's hard to find that balance. But once you do, I think that's really a secret weapon for a lot of super successful people.
But then the tricky thing is you find the balance and then it changes again because your work changes or something comes up, right? And you're like, I got perfect balance. And then you're like, oh God, now we got investment, or now we've got to do this next level stuff.
Exactly.
It can be pretty tricky. I'm going to just shamelessly plug another podcast that I host, which I can do on my own podcast, can't I? Yes, I think
definitely.
But I think it's relevant to the audience that will be listening to this within entrepreneurship and the startup space. So I hosted a Spotify original podcast called Killing It: Adventures in Startups and Mental Health.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So 6 episodes, and we're interviewing founders and CEOs and people who've built up big businesses about their mental health in a really open, conversational way. So if you're interested in more about that mental health aspect, then please do look up that podcast.
Definitely.
I'd love to know what you're up to now. So we sort of ended in that kind of high school building the sneaker business, but what's going on for you now? And of course, where can people get the book?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, the book came out July 27th. So it's been out a few months. I'm working on a bit of personal coaching. So in the book, I offer this framework called the Invent Framework. And I basically took all the stories and interviews and research that I did and combined it into this framework that people can apply to their own lives, whether it's doing bullying or just any type of other adversity. So the I is establish identity, just what it sounds like, figuring out what you stand for, who you stand for, what kind of confidence and positivity you want to put out into the world. And then the N is develop your nerve. So being comfortable with pain. Elon Musk said that if he had one recommendation to anyone who is going to start a business, it would be to build a high pain tolerance. And so going through adversity, like I said, whether bullying or any other type, just learning how to deal with hardship and take it in stride and go to do whatever you continue to do.
So almost embrace it. When that
exactly.
comes at you, you'd be like, bring it. This is like making me the man I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely.
And then the V is visualize your goals. So that talks about the law of attraction and manifestation, vision boarding, and how entrepreneurship, you could have the best idea in the world, but if you don't execute it properly, then it's nothing. So visualize your goals. Then the E is engage with others, and that touches on all the emotional intelligence aspects that comes with that you would develop from going through adversity and how that translates to hiring, firing, negotiation, team building. The N is embrace the now, and that focuses on our current state of technology in society and how all of the tools we have at our disposal, whether podcasting, blogging, streaming, how you're able to communicate your message and use it to grow your business. And then the T is homage to, I don't know if you've read the book, The Third Door by Alex Banayan. Have you?
I think I have a while ago. It's an older book, isn't it?
It came out like 2 or 3 years ago. But he's the youngest national bestseller ever. And his book, basically, he spent 7 years going to research, trying to find and interview some of the world's most successful people on how they started their business. And so he got to interview Bill Gates and Sugar Ray Leonard, Jessica Alba, Steven Spielberg, all of these really famous titans in their field. And he has this framework called the Third Door that he says life is like a nightclub. So the first door is the general admission door, and everyone waits online, and you wait your turn, you wait 3 hours to get in. Or you have the VIP entrance where the people, the celebrities, the influencers, the people who are born into money get right in. Or you have the third door, which is the unconventional door where you sneak around the back, you hop the fence, you climb in through the back window, and you do whatever it takes to get that opportunity and get your foot in the door. So what he found is that all of these super successful people had a version of their third door moment where they needed to take a crazy risk or do something super unconventional and daring to get their foot in the door and make something happen. So that last chapter talks about how you can build the confidence and the tools necessary to go and take that risk and jump into the world of entrepreneurship and have your own third door moment. So that framework is something now that I work to pass on through speaking gigs, and then also a bit of personal coaching, which is going to start in January. And then other than that, I've always said my dream when people asked when I was 10 years old, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a CEO. They say, what type of company? I say, I don't know. I just want to start a business. So the ultimate goal one day is just, start my own company. Still don't know exactly what field it may be, but right now we're just doing the book stuff and seeing.
Exciting. And so what's your website? Where can people find the book?
Yep. So website, you could find me and order the book at randymginsburg.com. You could also go on Amazon and search the title, Adversity to Advantage, how to overcome bullying and find entrepreneurial success, or just search my name, Randy Ginsburg. And then I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Randy Ginsburg. Yeah, you can find me there. And I love connecting with people, love hearing any feedback you have about podcasts or books. And of course, if you want me to speak, I'm there. So.
Yeah. Cool. We'll put all of that into the show notes. Now, would you say that you've had your third door moment?
I think I've had some, but I don't think I've had a defining one that's necessarily shaped my
whole trajectory. Yeah. But I would say,
that being said, I think I'm ready for one.
He's ready for a third, but equally, I'm hearing that almost as a mini third door moment was you standing on that stage with your parents in the audience, just taking that big leap, right?
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
Kind of
that's
led
one.
to this trajectory of being open and connecting to people.
Mm-hmm. How about you? You think you've had one?
I'm a little bit older than you, so I think I've had a few. Yes, I've had quite a few. Not just like to the theme of your book, the adversities have sometimes been the third door moments, because I wouldn't have made that career shift or made these different choices had I not had been punched in the face by life, so sometimes those have been sort of third door moments. And also there was one that led me into doing business for myself. I was working at a company. I met this guy who was really good at business, had built businesses, sold them, all this stuff. And I thought, I know what I'm passionate about, but this guy knows about business. So we discussed partnering. And I was like, he will be my other half, so to speak, as far as the puzzle piece of knowledge and whatever. He basically filled the void in my confidence.
Yeah,
right? I was like, together we could do this. So I quit my job, and I had just gotten divorced, and I had 2 kids and a mortgage. And I was just like, I'm going to quit my job fully.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds like a third door moment.
So I quit my job, and then within 3-4 weeks, it just fell apart with this business partner. And I just thought, this is not the person that's going to allow me to be my best self. And so suddenly I'm like looking around going, I just quit my job. I don't know anything about business. What the fuck do I know? I have mouths to feed,
Yeah.
But I had too much pride to go back to my boss, and I knew that our values weren't aligned. So from that point on, I fucking had to build it,
Yeah, good for you.
Which I've been doing, and it's been pretty momentous up until now.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's an awesome story. Congrats.
So once you have your next third door moment, please do circle back. And
yes, I definitely will.
Come back on the podcast. Randy, thank you so much for your time, and we'll definitely point people to the book. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a great time.